Did you know there is a Star Destroyer docking into the central trench of the Death Star in Rogue One? Well, the Death Star is actually a lot bigger than you may think, because the trench we see during the trench run is not the big one in the middle here, but rather a smaller trench on the upper section of the Death Star. And while we never saw this in A New Hope, Rogue One is technically not breaking any continuity by doing this. However, one thing that is different in this movie is the Imperial accents. Allow me to explain. You may remember how the Imperial officers in the original trilogy had British accents, but when listening closely to director Krennic speaking, you can tell something is off.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
I shall assume full responsibility for losing them and apologize to Lord Vader.
Did you catch that? Okay, no, I'm not expecting my audience to be dialect experts, but Krennic is actually given an accent belonging to a different background here because unlike the other Imperials, coming from prestigious backgrounds, Krennic comes from nothing. While he did serve in the Republic Navy, Krennic also was from the mid-rim planet Lexrol, making him a more working-class man than the majority of Imperial officers. The British accent that most of these men have comes off of a very high-class feel. If you remember earlier, I talked about how Rogue One did things we never saw in A New Hope, but funny enough, there are also 3 interesting parallels here as well. The first 2 I will talk about now, and the third, which ties into the finale of Andor Season 2, I will explain at the end of this video. But what if I told you there's a parallel to the binary sunset scene, which is the exact opposite of that scene? Can you guess which one of these shots it is? It's actually this one, which shows Galen Erso looking out at the dark landscape of La Mu, which is not only a visual flip, but also a storytelling flip as well. Think about it. While Luke here is looking to the future with curiosity and yearning for his destiny, Galen is looking out to a future of darkness with worry for his destiny. And let me know in the comments which movie you like better, Rogue One or A New Hope. But I have another visual flip for you. Krennic in his white uniform with the Death Troopers on the planet La Mu is a perfect opposite to Darth Vader with his stormtroopers on the Tantive 4. But our next detail features an object that appears across 3 random points in the Star Wars timeline. You see, while the Star Wars sequels really did everything they could to ignore the prequels, there are some glimpses of them here or there, like this battle droid head in The Rise of Skywalker on Kijimi, or even this Podracer engine on Jakku. Well, that same Podracer engine appears in Rogue One in the Yavin 4 temple. So, therefore, you can now watch The Phantom Menace, Rogue One, and The Force Awakens and say,
"Now this is Podracer."
And even more interesting is this connection with R4M9, who can also be seen in this temple in Rogue One, and is also seen on the Tantive 4 in the opening scene of A New Hope. But in Legends, his story goes deeper than this. You see, these stormtroopers that board the Tantive 4 aren't just any troopers, but rather Vader's Fist, also known as the 501st Legion, who actually owned R4M9 and used him to pull data concerning the stolen Death Star plans from the ship's computer. So while in canon they were owned by the Rebellion, in Legends, R4M9 was in fact an Imperial astromech droid. Speaking of astromech droids, another familiar droid we see in Rogue One is Chopper from Star Wars Rebels. He can be seen wheeling around the base when Mon Mothma learns about the Rebel attack on Scarif. Even crazier is that Hera Syndulla herself is referenced in this same base in a previous scene before the Rogue One group leaves. Yeah, they straight up threw her name out like that. But it's time to finally answer the question. What was Hera Syndulla and the other Spectre rebels doing during this time? Well, according to canon, Hera remained a crucial rebellion general during the original trilogy era, even being stationed on Hoth at one point, giving Han Solo and Chewbacca rations for the Ewoks on the farthest moon of Endor. Meanwhile, Zeb continued to help with the rebellion, while Ezra was stuck on Peridia and Sabine trained under Ahsoka to become a Jedi. While we don't know much about Hera's involvement in this mission in the Battle of Yavin, we do know that she was called to the briefing room on Yavin 4 to discuss the Death Star and also served at the Battle of Scarif. How do we know? Well, the Ghost itself appears with the rest of the fleet in this movie, and we can actually see it again during the Battle of Exegol in 35 ABY. This would make Hera 64 during that battle. But did you know this empty seat next to Tarkin might have been for Director Krennic? This may just be a theory, but what does the lore have to say about this? Well, Director Krennic was in fact a member of the Joint Chiefs, as they were called, until his death at the hands of his own creation. But there is a second empty seat. It is possible this one belonged to Admiral Ozzel, who is said to be on the council at one point. Now, this was before his death, but he still could have been attending a battle or something like that during this time. When looking at the background of Jeddah, we can see multiple strange aliens, including Pondo Baba, who worked with Dr. Evazan, a notorious mass murderer. But what about this guy? Yeah, this is Kaysen Bog, who funny enough doesn't have an upper half of his body, so he is basically the exact opposite of Darth Maul. Another crazy background detail relates to the two Death Star technicians operating the cannon here. In case you ever wondered, these two guys are actually helping to maintain the balance of energy used for these blasts to avoid massive internal explosions. But in this movie, director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson, plays one of these extras. Funny enough, in The Last Jedi, Gareth Edwards, director of Rogue One, plays a Resistance soldier on Crate. But our next detail is one you have to listen to, not one you can see.
Project code names: Stellar Sphere, Mark Omega, Pax Aurora, War Mantle, Cluster Prism, Black Saber.
While a lot of crazy things were referenced here, like Project Warhammer, which was how the clones were phased out for stormtroopers, as well as hyperspace tracking and Mark Omega, but they also mentioned the Black Saber, or as we know it, the Darksaber. This makes sense that the Imperials would have this on file after Sabine Wren and Bo-Katan led a rebellion against the Empire on Mandalore 1 year before this in 1 BBY. Also, during the Battle of Scarif, we can see an explosion that looks like the Mickey Mouse ears, which is, crazy enough, a reference to the company now owning Star Wars. But enough talking about Scarif, let's now look at the Battle of Yavin, which actually had a missing X-Wing squad that was finally used in Rogue One. That is because in A New Hope, there were originally going to be a blue squadron of X-Wings, which Luke was assigned to, along a red squadron of Y-Wings, which was removed from the film because their blue uniforms didn't work against the blue screens they were shooting with. They were replaced with Red Squad, and the Y-Wings became Gold Squad. But in Rogue One, we finally got Blue Squadron, which helped the Rebel forces by taking out the AT-ACTs on the beaches of Scarif, led by Antok Merrick. But welcome back to the self-improvement advice of this video, and today we are actually looking at John 12:25 in the Bible. If that's not your kind of thing, then you can skip to this time right here. Now, John 12:25 actually says, "Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life." So basically what this is going along with is the idea in the Bible that is repeated multiple times, that those who, hate their life, that live a very hard life, that go through hard struggles, that take the difficult path, are actually going to have the better, more prosperous life than the one that's, just enjoying it and, giving in to all the temptations and those kinds of things. So remember, if your life sucks, if, it's really hard, know that you're actually kind of doing the right thing.
Okay, so I realized I kind of just cut that off very abruptly with the Christian advice. So I'm not really saying that your life has to be miserable all the time, obviously that's kind of depressing, but the idea is that, the one who endures until the end will have victory. So just know there will be victory in the end, and who knows, hopefully, God has a good life in plan for you as well. But just know that if you're going through struggles right now and hardships, that's actually part of the plan for you, and it will pay off. But yeah, let's get back to the video.
However, at the end of this battle, we saw Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor holding each other before being vaporized by the Death Star firing on Scarif. This moment was made even better with the Andor Season 2 finale, which showed Bix holding Cassian's son, staring off into the sun. Both of these moments come full circle to Luthen Rael's monologue, where he says,
"I burned my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see."
But that concludes the 13 craziest hidden details of Rogue One, many of which tie into A New Hope, which makes sense as this is a direct spin-off to that movie. And I must say that Rogue One does a great job bridging the gap between Rebels, Andor, and A New Hope. But another good connection in Star Wars happens in Revenge of the Sith, where Anakin attempts to use the same move Obi-Wan used in The Phantom Menace on Mustafar. To find out why this worked for Obi-Wan but not for Anakin, you can click this video on screen right now.
Do it.